Hello, YouTube prepper friends. This is Lee, the Cold War Prepper, and I just wanted to real quick touch on a very serious subject, but we're going to try to touch on it in such a way that we give you some hope, and that is nuclear warfare. It's a terrible thing, but I think that you've been hyped up way more than what you should have been. We're not going to have a Mad Max scenario. We're not going to have the Book of Eli. We're not going to have The Walking Dead. If you study what has happened with nuclear warfare in the past, if you study the capabilities of what we have now, if you go to the site ready.gov/nuclear-explosion, that's the FEMA website. Learn everything you can about nuclear explosions. Learn about the what constitutes a nuclear explosion and how to protect yourself from each one of the elements. So let's talk about the three elements. First is the blast. That's the explosive part. That's the bomb, if you will. And so I know you've seen the devastating pictures of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the bomb detonated. It was an air burst, so that's number one. There is a big difference between air burst and ground burst. So an air burst, when the fireball never touches the earth, there is no large radioactive fallout. You have the blast from the explosion itself, you have the heat and light, okay, and then you also have the radiation. So it has alpha, beta, and gamma radiation. Alpha rays your skin can stop, beta rays normally your clothing can shield you from it, gamma rays are the ones we want to be most concerned with. If you're going to be killed with an air burst by radiation, it's going to be from the initial gamma radiation that comes out during that first burst. So if you hear the explosion, because remember, light travels faster than sound, so if you hear the explosion, you survived. That's, now the only thing you have to worry about is the blast effect, because the light and the gamma radiation are faster than the speed of sound. So if you've heard it, if you can hear it, you're good to go, pretty much good to go, okay? Let's take a look at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, August of 1945. And the details I'm going to give you are from the U.S. Army and from the Medical Corps and census that was taken in November of 1945, so about 3 or 4 months after the actual explosion. So what we find is that in 4 months after the explosion in Hiroshima, 66,000 people had died out of 255,000. So that's about 25.8% killed as a result of or within 4 months after the initial explosion. So 75% survived. Now, let's take that a little bit further, and let's say that there were those who were injured, either burns, severe burns, or trauma because of the blast effects or whatever, and those who had some residual radiation sickness. And I know that radiation sickness lasted, it infected people's thyroids. We still have people dying of cancer caused by radiation from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I understand the long-term effects, but let's talk about the immediate effects of the bomb. Then 69,000 out of 255,000 population were in some way medically affected 4 months after the explosion. So roughly 53% of the population were either killed or injured by the bomb. And then roughly, let's call it 50% of the people, there were no effects whatsoever. Now let's take a look at Nagasaki. Now Nagasaki is a little bit different. Hiroshima, the bomb was dropped over the city center. It was perfectly placed. And there weren't any intervening terrain features in the immediate downtown area. Now, when we take a look at Nagasaki, the bomb actually was dropped off target a little bit, and it went into the Urukami Valley. And so, because it was shielded by the valley and the folds of the earth and everything else, the fatality rates weren't as high as Hiroshima. So, we had 39,000 population killed within the first 4 months, or died within the first 4 months of the bombing. Out of a population of 195,000, which is about 20%. And then we had 25,000 who were injured out of the 195,000, which is about 12.8%. So we had a total killed, injured ratio of 33% in Nagasaki. So 1 out of every 3 was either injured or killed. 2 out of 3 survived. So we've got 50% in Hiroshima survived, 66% in Nagasaki survived, and So, chances, if you are prepared, remember, these people were not prepared. So now, if you prepare, if you know what we need to do in order to protect yourself, and you study up in advance, you get yourself some good protective equipment, and you know to duck and cover, and you know to get inside as soon as possible, we can reduce those percentages in our own country. I know we have bigger bombs now. Yeah, I understand that. But the principles are still the same. So let's talk about the three main things you want to do to protect yourself. Number one is time. So the amount of radioactivity, even if there is a radioactive fallout, so let's say it is a surface burst, I don't think any country is going to do a surface burst. They want to occupy the land. They want to occupy the resources of that land. So if you do a surface burst, you're totally denying yourself the opportunity to take over that land and take over the resources inherent to that country. I think it'll all be, if we're going nuclear, I think it's all going to be air bursts. So we're going to have time, distance, and shielding. So number one, time. That radioactivity, okay, is going to decrease by about, in most weapons grade half-lives of radioactivity, within 1 day after the explosion, you're going to have only 10% of the radioactive dosage left in those particles. And that's going to continue to decrease at the same rate over time. So probably within 2 weeks, you'd barely know it was there. Number two is distance. Now there's a formula, it's called the inverse of the squares, and it's 1 over distance squared, okay? So what I want you to do is think about having a water hose. So we've got all this radiation that's going to be the water coming out of the hose, and you're squirting it. But, this is kind of like you're holding it up in the air and doing one of those shower type of things. So look at all that water and how this is concentrated. You can squeeze it with your thumb and squirt it and concentrate it on something, and that would be really, really terrible. But in reality, this is all coming just like a water hose. It's just kind of spewing out and going all over the place. Now, I'm sure that as a gardener or as a kid when you were playing out in the water, you didn't want all that water to hit with too much force. You kind of wanted to fan it out. So you put your thumb over the end and it makes a little fan of water, and the water doesn't hit anything very hard at all. You still have the same amount of water coming out. You still have the same amount of radiation coming out from the explosion. It's just being dissipated over a larger area. So think of that being the theory behind the distance formula. As you get, so we've got this thing. If you're up close, when you're up close, it's concentrated, but it's kind of spreading like this, right? So way out here, you've only got this one ray hitting you, or this one ray, or this one ray. You don't have the concentration of it because it's going 360 degrees in a big circle, in a big sphere, and that's all getting dissipated. So the further away you get, the more dissipated it is because it's going to have those little holes, space that it's kind of missing as it sends out all this nuclear radiation. And of course, the third one is shielding. So the more mass, thickness, solid objects you can get between you and the radiation, the better off you're going to be. So if I can give you a little bit of hope, if it does go nuclear, if you study what happens during a nuclear explosion, if you study what can you do to reduce the effects of that explosion on you, how can you protect yourself and your family, personal protective equipment, potassium iodide, or anything like that that's recommended by FEMA, please go to ready.gov/nuclear-explosion and study up on that. They're going to give you all kinds of outstanding ideas of what you can do, how you can build a small containment area inside your homes to protect yourself with even more dense shielding so that you and your family can survive this. I think we can survive this. All you need to do is prepare. Stay safe. Say your prayers. This is Lee. Bye.